I always thought power meant control. That's what I learned growing up in our villa outside Naples, where the walls were thick enough to keep secrets and the iron gates were meant to keep the world out. My father, Sergio Martinelli, was a man people whispered about in the markets and crossed the street to avoid. He built an empire on fear, and he ruled our family the same way he ruled his business, with an iron fist that never softened, not even for his own blood. I was too young to understand what that meant. I just knew that when his car pulled into the courtyard, the air itself seemed to grow heavier. My older brother, Luca, understood it before I did. He was 7 years older than me, and I worshipped him the way little brothers do. He had our mother's eyes, soft, dark, full of something gentle that didn't belong in that house. I remember watching him play the piano in the salon, his fingers moving across the keys like he was speaking a language our father couldn't hear. Our mother, Elena, would sit beside him sometimes, her hand resting on his shoulder, and for those few moments, the house felt different. It felt like a home. But our father hated that softness. He'd stand in the doorway watching them, his jaw tight, his eyes cold. "A man doesn't waste time with music," he'd say, his voice cutting through the melody like a blade. "A man learns to take what's his." Luca would stop playing, his hands frozen above the keys, and our mother would look down at her lap. I didn't understand why she never fought back. I didn't understand a lot of things then. The day everything changed, I was 6 years old. I woke up to shouting, my father's voice booming through the hallways, my mother's softer pleas, and Luca's voice rising above them both, defiant in a way I'd never heard before. I crept to the top of the stairs and watched through the railing as our father grabbed my mother's arm, his face twisted with rage. "You're poisoning them against me," he said. Luca stepped between them, his shoulders squared, his voice steady. "Let her go." For a moment, time stopped. Then our father's hand connected with Luca's face, the sound echoing through the marble foyer like a gunshot. The next morning, our mother was gone. Our father told us she was sick, that she needed treatment at a special clinic far away. "She'll come back when she's better," he said, lighting a cigar and turning away as if the conversation was over. Luca cried for days. He'd sit in the music room, staring at the piano, his hands trembling, refusing to eat. I didn't cry. I was too confused, too small to grasp what losing her really meant. I just kept waiting for her to walk through the door with that smile she saved just for us. But she never came back. And slowly, the house of Martinelli became something else entirely, a mausoleum of silence, wealth, and unspoken grief. My father grew more powerful, more distant. Luca grew angrier, more rebellious. And I learned to disappear into the shadows, watching everything, understanding nothing. Years later, I would realize that we all lost something that day. Luca lost his innocence, my father lost his soul, if he ever had one, and I lost the person I was supposed to become. Because when you grow up in a house where love is a weakness and truth is a weapon, you learn to survive by becoming someone else entirely. But survival isn't the same as living, and it would take me 20 years, a brother's courage, and the ghost of my mother's love to finally understand the difference. How do you learn to be human when the only example you have is a monster?
Luca stayed for 3 more years after our mother disappeared, but he was never really there. I'd find him standing at his bedroom window at night, staring out at the lights of Naples below, his reflection ghosted in the glass like he was already halfway gone. He stopped playing piano. He stopped laughing. The only time he seemed alive was when he argued with our father, their voices clashing in the study, while I pressed my ear against the door, trying to understand words that were too big and too violent for a child to hold. Our father had plans for Luca. He wanted him groomed, educated, prepared to inherit the family business, though we all knew business was just another word for the empire of fear and illegal dealings that funded our villa, our cars, our carefully curated reputation. But Luca refused everything. He rejected the private meetings with our father's associates, men with hard eyes and harder handshakes who smelled like expensive cologne and cigarette smoke. He refused to learn the codes, the networks, the unspoken rules of our father's world. "You think you're better than this family?" our father shouted one night, his fist slamming against the mahogany desk. I was 9 years old, hiding in the hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs. "You think your mother's softness makes you noble? It makes you weak." Luca's voice was quieter, but it carried a weight that even I could feel. "I think there's a difference between strength and cruelty, and I think you forgot it a long time ago." The silence that followed was worse than the shouting. I heard footsteps, the sound of something breaking, and then Luca walked out of the study, his lip bleeding, his eyes wet but defiant. He looked at me crouched in the shadows and knelt down, his hand resting on my shoulder. "Listen to me, Marco," he said, using the name only he called me by, the name that made me feel real. "One day you're going to have to choose who you want to be. Don't let him make that choice for you." I didn't understand what he meant. I just nodded, scared and small, wishing I was brave like him. 3 days later, Luca was gone. I woke up to find his room empty, the bed made, the window open. He left nothing behind except a note on his pillow, written in his careful handwriting. "I'm sorry. I love you. Don't forget who you are." Our father didn't call the police. He didn't search for him. He sat in his study drinking whiskey, his face carved from stone, and when I asked where Luca went, he looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "Your brother is dead to this family. We don't say his name again." But I said his name. I said it in my head every night, whispering it like a prayer. "Luca, Luca, Luca." I imagined him out there somewhere, free from the weight of our father's empire, living the kind of life we only dreamed about. I held on to that image the way a drowning man holds on to driftwood, desperately, irrationally, because it was the only thing keeping me from sinking into the cold, silent depths of the house that was now my prison. And in the years that followed, as I grew older and more invisible, I realized something that terrified me. I was becoming exactly what my father wanted. Not the golden son, not the heir to his empire, but the shadow. The one who stayed quiet, who obeyed, who asked no questions and caused no trouble. The one who was easier to control because he had no dreams left to break. I didn't know how to escape. I didn't even know if I wanted to. Because when you've lived in the dark long enough, the light starts to feel dangerous. But somewhere deep inside, Luca's words echoed like a heartbeat I couldn't silence. "Don't forget who you are." How do you remember who you are when no one ever let you become it?
I grew up in that house like a plant in the wrong soil. Alive, but never really thriving. My father didn't hate me, he just didn't see me. I was the second son, the afterthought. The one who wasn't worth molding because I'd already proven I wasn't made of the right material. While Luca had been defiant, I was compliant. While he'd fought back, I'd learned to bow my head. And our father, in his cold, calculated way, decided that was good enough. I could stay. I could live in the villa, attend the right schools, wear the right clothes, as long as I never asked questions. So I didn't. I finished secondary school in Naples, went to university in Rome, business administration, because that's what our father demanded. I studied balance sheets and corporate law while my classmates talked about dreams and travel and futures that belonged to them. I smiled when I was supposed to smile. I shook hands when I was supposed to shake hands. And at night, alone in my apartment far from the villa, I'd stare at the ceiling and wonder if this emptiness was all I'd ever feel. I heard things about Luca over the years. Whispers, fragments, rumors that floated back to me like messages in bottles tossed across an ocean. Someone said they'd seen him in Milan. Another claimed he was in France. Then, years later,
a business associate of my father's, mentioned in passing that he'd met a young Italian man in New York. Sharp, successful, working in finance. "Looked just like you, Sergio," the man had said, laughing. Same eyes. My father's face had gone rigid. He'd ended the conversation immediately. That night, I searched online for the first time in years. I typed Luca's name into search engines, scrolled through social media profiles, looked for any trace of him. I found nothing. He'd disappeared completely, erased himself from the digital world the same way our father had erased him from our family. But I kept searching. It became a ritual. Late at night, after work, when the silence in my apartment grew too heavy, I'd look for him the way you look for a star in a clouded sky, not really expecting to find it, but unable to stop hoping. My father grew older, but no softer. His empire expanded into legitimate businesses, hotels, construction, logistics, though everyone knew the money was still dirty at its core. He tried to involve me sometimes, asking me to review contracts, attend meetings with his lawyers. I did what he asked, but I never felt part of it. I was an accessory, a name on a document, proof that the Martinelli line would continue. He never asked what I wanted, and I never told him. Because the truth was, I didn't know what I wanted. I'd spent so long being nothing, being invisible, that I'd forgotten how to want anything at all. I worked my quiet job at a consulting firm in Rome. I dated women who didn't ask too many questions. I visited the villa on holidays and sat at the long dining table, eating meals prepared by staff I barely knew, while my father read the newspaper and ignored me. It was a kind of death, slow and suffocating, but it was safe. And safety, I'd learned, was the only thing I could control. Then one afternoon, everything shifted. I was at the villa, sorting through some old files in my father's study while he was away on business. I wasn't supposed to be in there, but he'd asked me to find a contract, and I'd taken the opportunity to linger. That's when I saw it. A locked drawer in his desk, half hidden behind a false panel. I'd walked past that desk 1,000 times and never noticed it. But that day, something pulled at me. Curiosity, or maybe desperation. I don't know. I found the key taped to the underside of a lamp. My hands shook as I opened the drawer. Inside were documents, medical records, bank statements, letters with official seals. And at the top of the pile, a single envelope with my mother's name written in faded ink. Elena Martinelli. I opened it. Inside was a discharge summary from a private psychiatric hospital in Switzerland, dated 6 months after she disappeared. The words blurred as I read them. Patient stable, long-term care recommended, family contact restricted per guardian request. My father hadn't sent her away to get better. He'd locked her up and thrown away the key, and she'd been there, alone, for over 20 years. I sat in that study, the papers trembling in my hands, and for the first time in my life, I felt something sharp and undeniable rise up inside me. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't even anger. It was clarity. I finally understood what Luca had been trying to tell me all those years ago. You have to choose who you want to be. And I knew, in that moment, I couldn't be my father's shadow anymore. What do you do when you discover the monster isn't just in your house? He is your house.
I didn't confront my father. I'd learned enough from watching Luca to know that confrontation wouldn't change anything. It would only make him dig in deeper, fortify his walls, and shut me out completely. Instead, I did what I'd always done. I stayed quiet. But this time, my silence had a purpose. I started gathering information, slowly, carefully, like someone defusing a bomb they didn't fully understand. The documents in his study were just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, I copied files, took photos with my phone, memorized names and dates and account numbers. I found records of payments to the clinic in Switzerland, monthly transfers that had continued for 2 decades, automated and cold. Proof that he'd never forgotten her, but had never cared enough to bring her home. I found letters from doctors recommending visitation, recommending reintegration, recommending basic human contact. He'd ignored every single one. But the hardest part wasn't the evidence. It was carrying the weight of it alone. I couldn't tell anyone. My father's associates were loyal to him, not to truth. My few friends in Rome didn't know anything about my family's real history. And Luca was still gone, a ghost I couldn't reach. I felt like I was drowning in information, suffocating under the pressure of knowing something I couldn't act on. Not yet. Then one night, as I lay awake in my apartment, I had a thought that terrified and electrified me in equal measure. What if I could find Luca? What if after all these years I could reach him, tell him what I'd discovered, and finally do something, anything that mattered? It felt impossible. He'd disappeared so completely, covered his tracks so well. But I had resources now. I had access to my father's network, his contacts, his money. And I had something else: desperation. I started searching in earnest. I hired a private investigator in New York, the last place anyone had claimed to see him. I gave vague descriptions, outdated details, anything I could remember. The investigator was skeptical. 20 years is a long time, and New York is a big city. But he took the job. Weeks passed, then months. I began to lose hope, wondering if Luca had changed his name, his identity, his entire existence. Maybe he didn't want to be found. Maybe he'd built a life so far from ours that reaching back would only destroy it. But then one night, on a cold evening in November, my phone rang. The investigator's voice was calm, almost casual. "I think I found him." My heart stopped. He gave me an address in Brooklyn, a name, Lucas Marini, close enough to his real name to feel intentional, different enough to create distance. "He works in finance," the investigator continued. "Clean record, respected. Married, no kids. Lives quietly." I wrote down the address with shaking hands, staring at the words like they were a map to a place I'd only dreamed existed. I flew to New York 3 days later. I didn't tell my father. I didn't tell anyone. I just packed a bag, booked a ticket, and left. The flight felt endless, my mind spinning with 1,000 scenarios, what I'd say, how he'd react, whether he'd even want to see me. I hadn't spoken to Luca in over 20 years. I was a stranger now, a man he'd left behind, someone who'd stayed in the house he'd escaped. What if he saw me and only saw our father's shadow? I stood outside his building in Brooklyn for an hour before I worked up the courage to press the buzzer. It was a modest brownstone, nothing like the villa in Naples, but it felt warm somehow, lived in. When the intercom crackled to life, I heard a voice I almost forgotten. Older, steadier, but unmistakably his. "Yes?" I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out. My throat was tight, my eyes burning. I tried again. "Luca, it's me. It's Marco." There was a long silence. Then, quietly, almost in disbelief, "Marco?" The door buzzed open. I climbed the stairs to the second floor, my legs weak, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my chest. And when the apartment door opened, there he was. Older, grayer at the temples, but with the same dark eyes, the same quiet strength. He stared at me for a moment, and then he did something I didn't expect. He smiled. Not a big smile, not a happy one, but a real one. "I never thought I'd see you again," he said. I didn't know what to say, so I just said the truth. "I found her, Luca. I found Mom."
Luca pulled me inside, and for a moment we just stood there in his small, warm apartment, two strangers who used to be brothers. He looked older, yes, But there was something else, a calmness I didn't remember, a steadiness that felt earned. The apartment was simple, filled with books and light, a piano in the corner that made my chest tighten. He saw me looking at it and gave a small shrug. "I started playing again," he said, "about 10 years ago. Turns out I missed it." We sat at his kitchen table and I told him everything. I told him about the locked drawer, the documents, the clinic in Switzerland. I told him about the monthly payments, the ignored recommendations, the 2 decades our mother had spent alone because our father couldn't stand the idea of her being free. Luca listened without interrupting, his hands folded on the table, his face unreadable. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the Brooklyn street below. "I always knew," he said finally, his voice low. "Not the details, but I knew he didn't send her away to help her. He sent her away to control her, to punish her for making us too soft." He turned to face me and his eyes were wet. "I spent years hating myself for leaving, for not taking you with me, for not fighting harder." I shook my head, my own throat tight. "You were 17, Luca. What could you have done?" He smiled, but it was a sad smile. "I could have stayed. I could have protected you. But I didn't need protection anymore. I needed partnership. I needed someone who understood what it meant to grow up in that house, under that shadow, and still find the courage to walk into the light." "We can find her," I said. "We can bring her home." Luca studied me for a long moment, as if he was seeing me for the first time. Then he nodded. "Okay, let's go get our mother." We flew to Switzerland 2 weeks later. Luca took time off from work, something his wife, a kind woman named Sarah, whom I met only briefly, encouraged without hesitation. "Family first," she'd said, squeezing his hand. I envied him that, the simple certainty of being loved, of having built something real and good despite everything. We rented a car and drove through the mountains to the clinic, a pristine white building nestled in a valley, beautiful and cold like a postcard from hell. The staff were professional, polite, and unhelpful. They cited privacy laws, patient confidentiality, guardian consent. Our father's name still carried weight here, even across borders, even after all this time. But Luca was persistent in a way I'd never learned to be. He spoke calmly, firmly, presenting documents I hadn't known he'd brought. Proof of identity, family records, a legal letter his wife had helped him draft. Finally, after hours of waiting, a doctor agreed to meet with us. She was an older woman, kind-eyed but wary. She looked at us carefully, as if measuring whether we were threats or salvation. "Your mother has been here a very long time," she said. "Her condition was never as severe as the original commitment suggested, but she's fragile. And she's been told for many years that her family didn't want her." Luca's jaw tightened. "That's not true," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "We were children. We didn't have a choice." The doctor nodded slowly. "I believe you. But you should know she may not recognize you, or she may not want to." I felt something crack inside me, a fear I hadn't let myself feel until that moment. What if we were too late? What if the years had taken too much from her? But Luca stood up, his face set with quiet determination. "Can we see her?" he asked. The doctor hesitated, then nodded. "I'll take you to her." We walked down a long, sterile hallway, past rooms with closed doors and hushed voices. My heart was hammering. Luca's hand brushed against mine, a silent reassurance, and I held on to that small gesture like a lifeline. The doctor stopped at a door near the end of the hall and knocked gently. A soft voice answered from inside, so faint I almost didn't hear it, but Luca did. He closed his eyes, his breath shaking, and I knew he'd recognized it. Our mother's voice. After 20 years of silence, we'd finally found her. The doctor opened the door, and there she was, Smaller than I remembered, older, her dark hair now streaked with gray. She was sitting by a window, looking out at the mountains, and when she turned towards us, her eyes were the same eyes Luca had inherited, the same eyes I'd searched for in mirrors my whole life. She looked at us, confused at first, then something shifted. Recognition, disbelief, hope, and then, so quietly it was almost a whisper, "Luca." He crossed the room in 2 steps and fell to his knees beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "I'm here, Mama," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm here, and I'm never leaving you again." How do you measure the weight of 20 years in a single embrace?
We stayed in Switzerland for 3 days, working through the legal and medical logistics of bringing our mother home. Luca handled most of it. He'd built a life in America that had taught him how to navigate systems, how to push back against bureaucracy with calm, steady pressure. I watched him work, amazed at the man he'd become. He wasn't the angry, heartbroken teenager who'd fled Naples. He was someone who'd found himself in the wreckage and built something new. Our mother, Elena, was fragile but aware. The doctors explained that she'd been over-medicated for years, kept in a kind of fog that made her easier to manage. But in the last 5 years, under new administration, they'd slowly reduced her medications, and she'd begun to emerge. "She's been asking about you," one of the nurses told us quietly. "Both of you. She never believed her husband when he said you didn't want to see her." That information hit me like a punch to the chest. All those years, she'd been waiting, hoping, and we'd never known. We spent hours with her, sitting by her window, talking softly, filling in the gaps of 20 years. She cried when Luca told her about his life in New York, his work, his wife, the small apartment in Brooklyn. She reached for my hand when I told her about my quiet life in Rome, the job I didn't love, the man I'd become by default rather than by choice. "You're still so young," she said, her voice thin but steady. "You have time to become whoever you want to be." I wanted to believe her, but part of me wondered if I'd lost too much time already. On the 3rd day, we brought her home, though not to Italy. Luca insisted she come to New York, where he could care for her, where she'd be far from our father's reach. She agreed without hesitation. "I don't ever want to go back to that house," she said, and there was a firmness in her voice I didn't remember, a strength that had survived despite everything. We flew back together, the 3 of us, and I felt something shift inside me during that flight. We weren't running away. We were walking towards something better. Luca's apartment wasn't big enough for all of us, but his wife, Sarah, welcomed our mother with the kind of grace that made me understand why Luca had married her. Within a week, they'd found a small assisted living community nearby. Not a hospital, not a prison, but a place where Elena could have her own space, her own life, while still being close to family. Luca visited her every day. I stayed in New York for 2 weeks, visiting as often as I could, watching her slowly come back to life. She started smiling more, talking more, remembering things. But the question that haunted me during those 2 weeks was the one I couldn't answer. What now? I'd found my mother, I'd reconnected with my brother, but I still had a life in Rome, a job, an apartment, a man who didn't know I'd betrayed him. Because that's what this felt like. Not justice, betrayal. I'd taken something from him, something he'd controlled for decades, and I didn't know what the consequences would be. Luca sensed my hesitation. One evening, as we sat in his living room after visiting our mother, he brought it up. "You're thinking about going back," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, staring at my hands. "I have to. I have responsibilities, a job. I can't just disappear like you did." He was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his voice low. "You're wrong about one thing, Marco. I didn't disappear. I left. And there's a difference." "I had nothing to lose," he continued. "I was 17, angry, and I knew that if I stayed, I'd either become him or destroy myself trying to fight him. But you're not 17 anymore. You're a grown man, and you've already done the hardest part. You've seen the truth. Now you have to decide what to do with it. I met his eyes. What if he comes after her? What if he tries to take her back? Luca's expression hardened. Let him try. He doesn't have the power he thinks he does. Not here, not anymore. But I wasn't sure I believed that. Our father had built an empire on fear and control, and even an ocean away, I could still feel his presence like a shadow. I thought about the villa, the locked drawer, the documents I'd copied. I'd exposed his secret, but I hadn't confronted him. I'd run, just like Luca had. And part of me knew that as long as I kept running, I'd never be free. Before I flew back to Rome, our mother pulled me aside. We sat in her small room at the assisted living community, sunlight streaming through the window, and she took my hand in both of hers. "You don't have to protect me anymore," she said gently. "I'm safe now. But you need to figure out what you're protecting yourself from." I didn't have an answer, but as I boarded the plane back to Italy, her words echoed in my mind, mixing with Luca's. There's a difference between disappearing and leaving. And I realized for the first time that I'd spent my entire life disappearing. It was time to leave. What does freedom cost when the price is the only life you've ever known?
If this story is touching you in any way, give it a like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us keep sharing stories like this. And if you'd like to buy us a coffee, visit ko-fi.com/bondsoffate.
When I returned to Rome, nothing had changed and everything had changed. The city looked the same. The cobblestone streets, the ancient ruins, the cappuccino bars where I'd spent countless mornings pretending to read the newspaper. My apartment was exactly as I'd left it, neat and anonymous, a place where no one lived so much as existed. But I felt different, like I'd woken up from a long sleep and could finally see how small my world had become. I didn't go to the villa right away. I went to work, sat through meetings, reviewed contracts, smiled at colleagues who didn't know me and didn't ask. But my mind was in Brooklyn, in a small assisted living community, in a brownstone where my brother had rebuilt his life from nothing. I kept thinking about what Luca had said. "You've already done the hardest part." But I wasn't sure that was true. Discovering the truth was one thing. Acting on it was something else entirely. My father called a week after I returned. His voice on the phone was cold, clipped, impatient. "You missed the quarterly meeting," he said, as if I'd committed a minor offense, not disappeared for nearly 3 weeks. "I need you to review the logistics contracts, Thursday." I agreed automatically, the way I always did. But when I hung up, my hands were shaking. I realized I'd been holding my breath the entire conversation, waiting for him to ask where I'd been, what I'd been doing. He didn't, because he didn't care. That night, I made a decision. I started gathering more documents, not just about our mother, but about everything. The shell companies, the offshore accounts, the payments to associates whose names I recognized from news reports about organized crime. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with the information. I just knew I couldn't keep pretending I didn't see it. I couldn't keep being complicit in my own erasure. Thursday came. I drove to the villa, the familiar gates opening automatically, the courtyard as immaculate as ever. My father was in his study, as always, sitting behind the massive desk that made him look like a king on a throne. He glanced up when I entered, barely acknowledging me. "The contracts are on the side table," he said, returning to his own paperwork. "Make sure the Swiss logistics firm is listed properly. We can't have any inconsistencies." I picked up the folder, but I didn't open it. Instead, I stood there, staring at him. This man who'd shaped my entire life through absence and control. He looked older, his hair thinner, his shoulders slightly stooped.
For the first time, I saw him not as a powerful, terrifying figure, but as a man who'd chosen fear over love, control over connection, and I felt something unexpected: pity. "Where is she?" I asked. My voice was steady, calm, but the words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. My father looked up slowly, his eyes narrowing. "What did you say?" I repeated the question louder this time. "Where is she? Where is our mother?" His face went hard, his jaw clenching. "That's none of your concern. She's being cared for." I shook my head. "She was locked away for 20 years, and you never told us. You never let us see her." He stood up, his hands flat on the desk, his voice rising. "You have no idea what you're talking about. She was sick. She needed treatment." I cut him off. "She needed her family. She needed us, and you took that away from her, from us." He stared at me, and for a moment, I thought he might hit me the way he'd hit Luca all those years ago. But he didn't. He just laughed. A short, bitter sound. "You sound like your brother. Weak, sentimental. I thought you were smarter than that." "I found her," I said, my voice shaking now, adrenaline flooding my system. "I found her and I brought her to Luca. She's in New York. She's free. And there's nothing you can do about it." The silence that followed was suffocating. My father's face went pale, then red, his hands trembling with rage. "You did what?" he whispered, his voice deadly quiet. I took a step back, suddenly aware of how alone I was, how far from help. But I didn't run. I stood my ground. "I did what you should have done 20 years ago. I gave her back her life." He moved around the desk toward me, and I tensed, ready to bolt. But he stopped a few feet away, his eyes burning with something I'd never seen before. Not anger, but something worse. Fear. "If you think this makes you a hero," he said, his voice low and venomous, "you're a fool. You betrayed this family. You've betrayed me, and you'll regret it." I met his eyes and felt, for the first time in my life, completely unafraid. "No," I said quietly, "I won't." And then I turned and walked out of the study, out of the villa, out of the life I'd been trapped in for 30 years. I got in my car and drove back to Rome, my heart pounding, my hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the only solid thing in the world. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was done disappearing.
The days after my confrontation with my father were disorienting, like stepping off a train into a city I didn't recognize. I kept expecting something to happen, a phone call, a threat, some kind of retaliation, but there was only silence. My father didn't contact me, neither did his associates. It was as if I'd ceased to exist in his world the moment I walked out of the villa. And maybe I had. Maybe that was his final act of control, to erase me completely. But I didn't feel erased. For the first time in my life, I felt present. I called Luca and told him what had happened. He was quiet on the other end of the line, and I could hear the worry in his silence. "Are you safe?" he asked finally. I wasn't sure how to answer that. Safe from what? Physical harm? Maybe. Safe from the weight of everything I'd just done? No. But I told him I was fine. "I think I'm gonna leave Rome," I said. "I don't know where yet, but I can't stay here." Luca didn't try to convince me otherwise. "You can come to New York," he said. "Stay with us for a while. Figure things out." I thanked him, but I wasn't ready for that yet. I needed to untangle myself from my old life first, to close the doors I'd left open. I quit my job, a conversation that took less than 10 minutes, and left my manager looking confused but unbothered. I gave notice on my apartment. I sorted through my belongings, realizing how little I actually owned, how few things mattered. And then, one afternoon, I received an email. It was from a lawyer in Naples, someone I didn't recognize, with a subject line that made my stomach drop. Estate of Sergio Martinelli.
I stared at the screen for a long time before opening it. Inside was a brief formal message explaining that my father had suffered a massive stroke 3 days earlier. He was in a private hospital in Naples, stable but incapacitated. The lawyer was reaching out to notify family members. I read the email 3 times, waiting to feel something. Sadness, relief, anger, but all I felt was a strange, hollow numbness. I didn't go to the hospital. I didn't call. I knew what he'd say if he could speak, that I was a traitor, a disappointment, a failure, and maybe he'd be right by his own twisted standards. But by mine, by the standards of the man I was trying to become, I'd finally done something that mattered. I'd chosen my mother over his cruelty. I'd chosen my brother over his empire. And I'd chosen myself over the shadow he'd tried to trap me in. A month later, I was packing the last of my things when another email arrived. This one was from the same lawyer, and the subject line was simpler: Final Affairs. I opened it reluctantly. My father had died. The stroke had been more severe than initially reported, and he'd passed away quietly, alone in the hospital. There would be a small service. The lawyer asked if I would be attending. I closed my laptop without responding. I didn't go to the funeral. I didn't want to stand in a room full of people who'd feared him, who'd profited from his cruelty, and pretend to mourn. Luca didn't go either. We talked on the phone that night, and there was a strange, shared understanding between us. He made his choices. We don't owe him anything, not even our grief. And I realized he was right. Our father had spent his life building walls, hoarding power, controlling everyone around him. And in the end, he died the way he lived, alone. But the story didn't end with him. A few weeks later, I learned that his empire had collapsed almost immediately after his death. The legitimate businesses were seized by creditors. The illegitimate ones crumbled under investigations that had been quietly building for years. The villa was sold to pay debts. Everything he'd built, the wealth, the power, the carefully constructed legacy, dissolved like smoke. He'd left nothing behind but wreckage. And strangely, that felt like a kind of justice. Not the dramatic, satisfying kind you see in movies, but the quiet, inevitable kind that comes when you build your life on fear and control. Because the truth is, empires built on suffering can't last. They fall, eventually, under their own weight. And the people they hurt, they survive. They heal. They build something new. I flew to New York a month after my father's death. Luca picked me up from the airport, and we drove to visit our mother. She was sitting in the garden of the assisted living community, a book in her lap, her face turned toward the sun. When she saw us, she smiled, a real smile, the kind I'd almost forgotten existed. "My boys," she said, reaching for both our hands. And in that moment, I understood what Luca was trying to teach me all along. The real legacy isn't what you inherit, it's what you build. It's who you choose to love and how you choose to live. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I'd finally chosen right. What does it mean to be free when the cage was always in your own mind?
I stayed in New York for 6 months, not as a visitor, but as someone trying to understand what it meant to belong somewhere. Luca helped me find a small apartment in Brooklyn, a few blocks from his own. It wasn't much, a studio with old radiators and creaky floors, but it was mine. I'd never had anything that felt mine before. And the simple act of arranging furniture, of choosing where to put a lamp or hang a picture, felt revolutionary. I didn't have a plan at first. I'd left my entire life behind. My job, my city, my language in some ways. I spent the first few weeks just walking. Brooklyn, Manhattan, Queens. I walked for hours, listening to the city, watching people live their lives with a kind of casual confidence I envied. They seemed to know where they were going, who they were. I was still figuring that out. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of not knowing. Luca introduced me to people. Friends from work, neighbors, people from his wife's book club.
They were kind, curious, generous in ways I wasn't used to. They asked questions about Italy, about my life, and I found myself editing the truth, not out of shame, but out of self-preservation. How do you explain that you spent 30 years disappearing, that you'd only recently learned how to exist? So I kept things vague, simple. I needed a change, I'd say. And people would nod, accepting that answer without pushing for more. My mother thrived in ways we'd never expected. She started painting, something she'd loved as a young woman but had given up after marrying our father. Her room at the assisted living community became filled with canvases, landscapes, portraits, abstract swirls of color that seemed to capture emotions she couldn't put into words. Luca and I would visit her twice a week, sometimes together, sometimes separately. She'd show us her work, ask about our lives, and slowly, carefully, we rebuilt the relationship that had been stolen from us. One evening, as I sat with her in her room, she asked me a question I'd been avoiding. "What are you going to do now, Marco?" I didn't have an answer. I'd been living day to day, surviving rather than planning. "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't know what I'm good at. I don't know what I want." She reached across the small table and took my hand. "That's okay," she said gently. "You've spent your whole life being what other people needed you to be. It's going to take time to figure out what you need." I started taking classes at a community college, history, literature, things I'd always been curious about but never had the freedom to explore. I got a job at a bookstore in Park Slope, shelving books and helping customers find what they were looking for. It wasn't glamorous, it didn't pay much, but it felt honest in a way nothing in Rome ever had. I liked the quiet rhythm of it, the small interactions with strangers, the sense that I was contributing something, even if it was just a recommendation or a smile. Luca and I grew close in a way we'd never been as children. We'd meet for coffee on Sunday mornings, talking about everything and nothing. His work, my classes, our mother's progress, the strange, bittersweet relief of knowing our father was gone. He told me stories about his early years in America, the loneliness and fear, the jobs he'd worked to survive. "I cleaned offices at night for 3 years," he said one morning, laughing at the memory. "I was so scared someone would recognize me, that somehow he'd find me and drag me back." "But you made it," I said. He nodded. "I made it. And so will you." I wanted to believe him. Some days I did. Other days I felt like an imposter, a 30-year-old man starting from zero, surrounded by people who'd figured out their lives decades ago. But Luca reminded me, over and over, that there was no timeline for becoming yourself. "You're not behind," he'd say. "You're exactly where you need to be." One year after I left Rome, I went back. Not to the villa. That had been sold, demolished, turned into luxury condos, as if erasing the building could erase the history. But I went to Naples, to the places I'd known as a child, the markets and piazzas and narrow streets that still smelled like espresso and sea air. I walked past the school I'd attended, the university where I'd studied, the ghost of a life I'd left behind, and I felt nothing. No longing, no regret, just a quiet acknowledgement that I'd been someone else once, and I wasn't that person anymore. I stood on the waterfront, looking out at the bay, and thought about the 8 topics that had shaped this story. The Iron Father, the mother's disappearance, the golden sun, the house of silence, the world outside, the truth, the reunion, the real legacy. I flew back to New York that evening. Luca picked me up from the airport, and as we drove through the city, I felt something I'd never felt before.
A sense of home. Not a place exactly, but a feeling. The feeling of being known, of being seen, of being enough. My mother was waiting for us at Luca's apartment, a small dinner prepared, her smile bright and real. We sat around the table, the three of us, and talked late into the night. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the silence that followed, because I knew, finally, that I wasn't alone. What do you become when you're finally free to choose?
Sometimes I wonder what my father would think if he could see me now. Not the man I am, exactly, but the life I've built. The small apartment, the job at the bookstore, the quiet evenings with my mother and brother. He'd probably call it a waste. He'd probably say I threw away everything he gave me, the name, the wealth, the power, and maybe, by his standards, I did. But by mine, I didn't throw anything away. I just finally picked up the things that mattered. It's been 3 years since I left Rome. 3 years since I walked out of that villa and chose a different path. And I won't pretend it's been easy. There are days when I feel the weight of starting over, the embarrassment of being a grown man who's still figuring out basic things like what he wants to be when he grows up. But those days are fewer now. And on the good days, the days when I'm shelving books or sitting with my mother while she paints or laughing with Luca over something ridiculous, I feel something I never felt in that house. I feel alive. My mother is doing well. She still lives in the assisted living community, but she's more independent now, more herself. She talks about the past sometimes, but not with bitterness. She talks about it the way you talk about a storm you survived, grateful to be on the other side, aware of the damage, but focused on the rebuilding. She's teaching art classes to other residents now, and watching her share something she loves with people who appreciate it, it's a kind of redemption I didn't know was possible. Luca is still the steady, grounded presence he's always been. He and Sarah are talking about adopting, a decision that fills me with a strange, unexpected hope. The idea that our family, which was built on so much cruelty and control, could expand to include someone new, someone loved and chosen and safe. It feels like a final act of defiance against everything our father represented. I'll be an uncle. I'll get to help shape a life that isn't defined by fear, and that feels like the best legacy I could imagine. As for me, I'm still figuring it out. I enrolled in a master's program in social work, something that surprised even me. But I realized, after all those years of being invisible, that I want to help people who feel the same way. People who are trapped, who don't see a way out, who think their lives are already written. I want to tell them what Luca told me. It's not too late. You can choose a different story. You can leave. Not by disappearing, but by walking towards something better. There are still hard days. Days when I second-guess everything, when I wonder if I made the right choice, when I miss the simplicity of not having to think about who I am. But then I remember the house of silence, the locked drawer, the 20 years my mother spent alone, and I remember that simplicity isn't the same as peace. Safety isn't the same as freedom, and surviving isn't the same as living. I think about my father sometimes, not with anger, but with a kind of sad understanding. He was a man who believed power was the only thing that mattered. And in the end, all his power couldn't save him from dying alone, from losing everything he'd built. He never learned what Luca learned, what I'm still learning, that the real strength isn't in control, it's in letting go. It's in trusting people, in choosing love over fear, in being vulnerable enough to admit you don't have all the answers. Today, when I look in the mirror,
I see someone I'm still getting to know. I see the ghost of the boy who lived in that villa, yes. But I also see the man who walked out, who found his brother, who saved his mother, who chose a different path. I see someone who's still scared sometimes, still uncertain, still carrying scars, but I also see someone who's learning how to heal. And that, I think, is enough. Because redemption isn't a destination. It's not something you achieve and then you're done. It's a practice, a daily choice, a commitment to being better than you were yesterday. My brother taught me that. My mother taught me that. And life, messy, difficult, beautiful life, teaches me that every single day. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if I'll stay in New York forever or if I'll find some other place to call home. I don't know if I'll be good at social work or if I'll end up doing something completely different. But for the first time in my life, I'm okay with not knowing, because I've learned that the questions are just as important as the answers. And the journey, the messy, uncertain, terrifying, wonderful journey, is the whole point. So if you're reading this, if you're in your own house of silence, if you're living a life that doesn't feel like yours, know this: you can leave. You can choose differently. It won't be easy. It might be the hardest thing you ever do, but it's possible. And on the other side of that fear, that uncertainty, that leap into the unknown, there's a life waiting for you. A real one. Yours.
And that, I've learned, is worth everything.
If this story spoke to you, if you saw a part of yourself in it, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next stories, each one made with heart and honesty. Share this video with someone who might need it today. And if you'd like to support this project, you can buy us a coffee at ko-fi.com/bonds-of-fate. It's a small gesture that helps us keep creating stories filled with soul and truth.